As part of the Witness TV series, it's important to us to be transparent about what inspired the writing of the scenes included in the series. To that end, this short documentary episode is a companion piece of the short film Wife of a Prophet. So, what inspired it? It was a download of information. I was awakened at 2:30 in the morning with this entire scene in my head, and by 6 a.m., it was written and sent off to my lead actors, producing partners, and composer to see if it was something that we should shoot. It was a yes for them, so we shot it. What actually inspired it? Let's start with the music. There's a hymn in the scene, God Moves in a Mysterious Way. Historically, it was written by William Cowper, 1773, and it was published a year later. Shortly after that, it was included in the Only Hymns hymn book. I have not been able to find if the tune we use in our hymn book was the same tune that was used in 1827 when our film takes place, but the hymn was known by many Protestants. So it's a period-accurate hymn that the Smiths might have sung, though that is something I cannot prove. We open with Sophronia Smith singing the first two verses in our film. It helps set the tone. And then later, Emma joins in the singing, and we reveal the great Twyla Wilson as our selected actress for Emma. We're excited about that.
Emma, you're familiar with music.
My father paid for me to learn it in schooling, and it would be a treat to sing with you, Sophronia.
Now, this is based off several historical accounts, one of which says that Emma hired out as a school teacher in the Harmony, Pennsylvania area. And as many of you are aware, Emma would later receive a revelation, Doctrine and Covenants 25, telling her to put together a selection of hymns for the church. So this, I felt, was a nice way to introduce her. Then we have the amazing talent of John Donovan Wilson, Twyla's husband, who is playing our Joseph Smith Jr. and is shown in this scene. Now, this scene takes place about a week after their marriage. You might assume at first glance that this is their wedding night, but according to the History of the Church, Volume 1, they eloped at the home of Squire Tarbill, and digging into some census records, you find his name was Zechariah Tarbill. He lived in South Bainbridge, New York. That was approximately 100 miles from Manchester, where the Smiths lived. So traveling 100 miles that same day by horse and buggy was not really possible. But I guessed by the way travel would go in January in New York in 1827, it would be about a week or more. Averaging 20 miles a day seems reasonable. Okay, here's where we get into some relatively controversial territory. In our scene, Emma requests an interview with Joseph, stating,
Sophronia tells me that you might be a prophet.
What did you tell her?
Oh, your prophecy of Deacon Jessup taking Abigail's milk cow. Seemed quite impossible until it happened.
Now you might be asking, what? A prophecy about a milk cow? This comes directly from Lucy Mack Smith's book, The History of Joseph Smith by His Mother. In chapter 21, sometime after Alvin's death, she tells how the family had become quite delighted by the teachings of a Presbyterian minister in the area that she called Deacon Jessup. Joseph refused to go to meeting, saying that the family didn't know the wickedness in some of these men's hearts. In Lucy's own words, she says, one day, he said that he would give us an example and that we might set it down as a prophecy. Note the word prophecy here. It's the first time she says anything about Joseph prophesying. In fact, it's the first time in any of the history of the church that I have found anything about Joseph giving a prophecy. Now, according to Lucy, Joseph said this, you look at Deacon Jessup and you hear him talk very piously. Well, you think he is a very good man. Now, suppose that one of his poor neighbors should owe him the value of a milk cow, and that this poor man had 8 little children. Moreover, that he should be taken sick and die, leaving his wife with 1 cow, but destitute of every other means of supporting herself and family. Now I tell you that Deacon Jessup, religious as he is, would not scruple to take the last cow from the poor widow and orphans in order to secure the debt, notwithstanding he himself has an abundance of everything. So that's the prophecy. What did Lucy say about this prophecy? Quote, at that time, This seemed impossible to us. Does that sound like the family believed Joseph was a true prophet of God at that time? From this statement, it appears at least that they doubted it. Now, previous to this instance, Joseph had already told the family of the Savior's visit to him. He had already told them of Moroni's visit to him. But how much detail did Joseph share with his family? Was this prophecy the first instance where the family began to believe Joseph was a prophet? The sectarians didn't believe prophets and apostles were necessary anymore. In fact, that they were completely gone. In fact, very few believed there were any prophecies since the days of Christ. But when did the family know Joseph was a prophet? When did Joseph know he was a prophet? It's often assumed that Moroni had told him. In Joseph's account in the history of the church, he mentions that Moroni told him that, quote, his name would be had for good and evil among all nations. But I have yet to find an actual quote where Moroni tells him he was called as a prophet at this time. It's reasonable to assume he was. It's reasonable to assume that Moroni told him that he would be, but I have not found an actual quote. After Moroni had told him to return to Comoros Hill each year until the time of getting the plates, Joseph records this in Volume 1 of the History of the Church on page 16. Accordingly, as I had been commanded, I went at the end of each year, and at each time I found the same messenger there, and received instruction and intelligence from him at each of our interviews respecting what the Lord was going to do, and how and in what manner his kingdom was to be conducted in the last days. Oh, how I wish. I absolutely wish I could have been there to know what Moroni and Joseph talked about. But you can logically conclude that Moroni might have told Joseph all of the Lord's plan here, and that Joseph was told he was going to be the prophet of the restoration. Or, because of Joseph's youth, inexperience, and human weaknesses, Moroni and the Lord might have withheld some information about Joseph's calling and had him learn line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little concerning his calling. But even if Joseph was told everything, he mentioned several times in his life, I would to God I could tell you who I am, but if I did, not one of you would stay with me. That one is paraphrased, but it suggests to me that Joseph rarely or never gave the whole story to everyone at once. For example, there are at least 9 accounts of the first vision. Each of these accounts have a few different details, and critics love to say Joseph kept changing his story. But think how any of you would relate an important experience in your life. Would you tell the same experience to every single person in the exact same words every time you related that experience? Would you share certain details with one and withhold other details for the sake of time, or maybe because there's certain details you know they wouldn't believe? These are just questions I ask.
Why didn't you tell me?
What do you mean?
Visions and visitations are one thing, but a prophet?
Like Moses? Like Elijah?
Some may suppose by this that Joseph withheld information from Emma until after they were married. And Joseph withheld information from his closest friends and most trusted confidants about who he was until the end of his life. I suggest that even now we don't know who Joseph is in the eyes of God. Some suppose that the Hale family was against Joseph and Emma marrying because of Joseph's claim of Moroni's visitation. But Isaac Hale's affidavit suggests the first time he heard anything about plates was when Joseph and Emma, as a married couple, were living in his house in late 1827. Joseph's own words in the History of the Church, Volume 1, page 17 says, owing to my continuing to assert that I had seen a vision. Which vision, you might ask? My wife's father's family were very much opposed to our being married. This single vision Joseph refers to could have been his visitation from the Savior, and it could have been Moroni's visit. But given the community's reaction to Joseph's first claimed vision, it's reasonable that he would be a lot less likely to telling people about Moroni's visitation. My personal belief from these statements is that Joseph did tell Emma about Moroni prior to their marriage, but didn't tell her that he was called to be a prophet because he still didn't know the full extent of his calling at that time. The first mention I've found of someone calling Joseph a prophet of God comes from more of a hearsay story because I haven't found documentation on this. But it states that Oliver might have written David in 1828, bearing testimony that Joseph is a prophet. This was about a year and a half after Joseph was married to Emma. And it wasn't until April of 1830, more than 3 years after Joseph's and Emma's marriage, that 6 persons formally sustained Joseph Smith as a prophet. And they did this in response to the revelation in section 21 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord himself says, "There shall be a record kept among you, and in it thou shalt be called a seer, a translator, a prophet, an apostle of Jesus Christ, an elder of the church," etc. In fact, in section 20, which was the original Articles and Covenants of the church, the wording says, quote, "Joseph Smith Jr., who was called of God and ordained an apostle of Jesus Christ to be the first elder of this church." There's no mention of the term or title of prophet anywhere in the original Articles and Covenants of the church. So section 21, given April 6, 1830, is the first instance where I've found that Joseph was acknowledged as a prophet, and that was more than 3 years after where our scene in this little short film takes place. I want to just say that these conclusions are my own, based on what documentation I can find, and I have yet to find documentation that proves that Joseph knew he was a prophet prior to his marriage to Emma, or that he shared all the details of Moroni's visits with anyone. Now, like always, I could be wrong, and I often am, and therefore open to correction. Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode. Please leave feedback so we know how to improve in the future, and God bless you all.